Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Lights, Camera, Accolade. Today, we're going to be discussing the 4th Academy Awards ceremony. I'm Sarah.
I'm Jake.
And I'm Abby.
So the 4th Academy Awards was hosted in November 1931, so solidly in the Great Depression. And I'm going to be honest, the movies this year kind of put me into a depression. They were not my favorite.
I'm glad you said it.
Chrysantha hated these movies so much that she decided to get sick and miss the recording of this episode. And we'll be back when the movies are conveniently better.
She made the right choice. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. For context, we watched The Front Page, East Lynne, Trader Horn, and Skippy. And we'll be watching the winner this year, Cimarron. I don't really have much context for this year other than things were bad for a lot of people.
Yeah. The depression was depressing.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah, exactly.
I think in talking about some of these movies, we'll maybe have occasion to touch on some of what was going on.
Yeah.
In particular, Skippy, ironically enough.
Yeah. Well, do we want to jump into summaries?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first one is The Front Page, which stars Adolphe Menjot as an unscrupulous editor determined to keep his star reporter from running off to enjoy married life with his wife, and Pat O'Brien as the aforementioned star reporter. It's a fast-talking black comedy about the allure of a good story and the corruption necessary to get it. It's based on a play by the same name. The movie centers around kind of this push and pull relationship between the editor, Walter, and the star reporter, Hildy, as Walter tries to convince Hildy to stay in town to cover the execution of an alleged cop killer. Features corrupt city officials rushing to execute a potentially innocent man to increase their chances of being reelected, an incompetent chief of police, barely their roles for 3 women, and a remarkably flat performance from Pat O'Brien. Sorry, Pat.
I feel like your summary was more entertaining than the movie.
I should have done it like really fast, and then it would have hit all the beats.
And then we could have all talked over you, and then that would be exactly what the movie was. Which I do have to say, for the time, especially with the sound technology that they had, I kind of want to say that this was really them flexing how much they were able to bring realism into filming, because you did have everyone's talking super fast, people are talking over each other, and it creates this hectic kind of vibe. But it's not like the movies that we've watched before, where if more than one person is talking at a time, you just can't hear what anyone is saying. So I think for the technology of the day, it was, at the very least, really impressive to have relatively clear audio throughout.
Yeah, it was funny, and you used the word before about this movie, Abby, of the patter of it, that kind of manner of speech of like, hey, what are you talking about? Hey, I was used to that, and I was expecting that with a lot of these films. But for whatever reason in this one, it kind of took me out of it, just because I think some of those performances were so flat. Like, just from a performance perspective, you like to see a little bit of range and variety in their delivery and kind of the emotions they're conveying. And it felt very one note. And so it made the movie kind of drag a bit. And also, for me, the thing that frustrated me most about it is the subplot that was most interesting was this guy who was potentially going to be executed for, I think he was like a rabble rouser. I thought it was interesting the movie called him an anarchist and not like a socialist or communist, because I think that was one of the strategies that left-wing screenwriters and things in Hollywood use to get around censorship. But in any case, he's kind of like this activist type guy who was down on his luck and went for broke. I don't remember if he tried to shoot somebody or something was the catalyzing event. But anyway, he escapes over the course of the movie, and you learn a little bit about his close relationship with this prostitute character, which is one of the few female characters in this movie. She, in order to like help him escape, tries to distract everybody and like takes a leap out the office window, and it's never really acknowledged like what happens to her. The main character looks out the window and looks down and is like, oh, she's still alive, and then they just never pick it up again. And I'm over here like, this is the one thing about this movie I want to learn more about, you know?
Yeah, I think also they have like they have the most nuanced performances as well, which is really interesting.
Not necessarily saying much.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, which Honestly, this just made me realize that 1931 had more than one movie where a woman was taking a dive off a high surface, which,
Right.
what's up with that? Why was that the theme this year?
Yeah.
I just also wanted to say, like, I think overall it had like a cynical view of journalists.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with, Walter Burns obviously trying to keep Hildy. But everyone in the cast, we had a lot of sequences where they were just really callous about large breaking stories that were about like someone died or there was a tragedy. And it's just like, well, wake me up when it's something newsworthy.
Yeah,
So
everyone's
that sense
kind of a
doing
terrible person.
anything for a story. Yeah, everyone's a terrible person, maybe just hardened to the struggles that people are facing. And maybe that resonated with people. But yeah, very, very few likable characters in this.
Yeah, I think the thing that I found most interesting about this is the camera is pretty mobile. So,
Yeah.
like, you
Yeah,
get a
that was
lot of
cool.
shots of, like, the camera. So, all these reporters sitting at the table, and the camera is dollying around the table in a circle. There's some interesting camera shots. The depth of shadow and light is pretty, like, okay. Like, there's some interesting stuff going on there. But I think, I don't know, there's other versions of this movie that I like a lot better.
Right.
So I know I haven't seen this, but I now kind of want to watch it. There's a Walter Matthau one that was made, I think, in 73 or something like that. I didn't look it up. And then the famous one is His Girl Friday. The performances in that are really great, and that's kind of a looser adaptation. I think it kind of splits the role of Hildy so that you have like kind of two dueling kind of investigator kind of vibe, which is fun.
Yeah.
So
I came into this with the only bit of trivia knowing that His Girl Friday was like somewhat of a remake. So I was excited for this movie because I actually loved His Girl Friday when I watched it, but it's not really the same movie.
No, it's not.
Like I gotta say. But it did have the high point of starting with probably the cutest opening credit sequence that we've seen so far in introducing the cast members where, it looked like a newspaper and each cast got like their own little
yeah, you're
page and a fake little story, and the pages turn to introduce you to everyone involved in the movie, and that was really cute. And then I just kind of fell asleep.
I guess maybe you could call this the first like ensemble movie that we've seen. The only problem was the whole ensemble was dressed the same and talking the same, so I couldn't really tell them apart. But one last thing I want to mention about this before maybe we move on is I thought it was interesting in the sense that in the time we live in, right? I think there's like an overabundance of media, movies and TV that kind of valorize journalism and journalists in kind of the post-Trump era. It's like, this is so important. These people are serving this critical role. I even just watched that Civil War movie, which was entertaining and actiony, but very much like, whatever you think about them, they may be hard drinking and tough, but journalists are important, they keep us all safe. Whereas this movie was just kind of like, journalists are kind of like rat bastards like they're like chauvinistic and like just not too bright and just kind of
they're
strange.
Freelancers looking for their next paycheck.
Exactly. So that was kind of refreshing to see them humbled in a way after all these movies these days of like, the honor of the newspaper or whatever you want to call it. It gets old.
Apparently, the screenwriter, Bartlett Cormack, he's the same person who wrote The Racket.
Oh,
so
okay.
Cute little
I could see
callback
that
there. And that's about it, honestly. To my knowledge, not a lot of drama on set. Nothing too crazy. So, yeah, it was a movie.
So next up, we have East Lynne. It stars Anne Harding as Lady Isabella, who is the trophy wife of a conservative and like the stuffy and obsessed with following social norms sense country gentleman. It's a melodrama based on a novel by the same name. We follow Isabella through the trials and tribulations of her unhappy marriage, her unhappier divorce, and social exile. And then all the while, Isabella is trying and failing to convince her husband to let her maintain a relationship with her son. It's one of those nothing is ever the heroine's fault and everything bad in the universe is going to happen to her anyway type stories. And I'd say that almost every emotional beat is being explained to the audience via like dramatic monologuing. I'd say it's kind of largely notable for being an all but lost film. Only one film print exists and it's in the archive at UCLA. The Frankenstein copy that we watched fell off the back of a truck.
Yeah, it was salvaged.
It also has, salvaged. It also has a, I would say, unintentionally comedic ending.
Yeah. Maybe we're just terrible people. Maybe Jake is sitting here horrified,
Oh, God.
but
Well,
Yeah.
that's what I was gonna
oh
say.
no.
I'm glad I watched this one alone because I teared up a little bit at the end.
Oh, no!
It was so sad.
So, yeah, I'm glad you watched that one alone because we were kind of giggling by the end of it. It didn't help that,
Well,
obviously, where I guess we'll just start with the ending. But she's walking into the woods and you see the camera behind her just watching her walk. And I made an off joke, just like, oh, straight off a cliff as a joke. But then it immediately cut to the shot where it's just a cliff face. She's blind at this point. So she's unwittingly about to meet her doom by walking straight off a cliff. So it was kind of just the timing of the joke, I think. But it also came out of nowhere. I don't know.
I feel like if I had lived at an estate for many years,
You
and
would
had
know,
nothing
yeah.
to do because my husband's domineering sister is controlling my entire
I
life,
hated
making
that
it so I
lady.
can't do anything.
Yeah, she
I
was
feel like
awful.
I would probably know a fair amount about the landscape of the property, and
which
like-
I think she wanted to die.
Maybe it's on
maybe.
purpose.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
She was
Purpose,
a
yeah.
Christ-like figure.
This is true. Maybe she did want to die.
She was like, damn, I cannot save this movie.
Well, now in listening to you describe it, though, Abby, I feel like kind of stupid for half. I'll preface. I didn't think it was great, but like, I don't know. It's kind of like torture porn in a sense. Like this woman's life
Yeah.
you kind of put it right. It was like nothing bad can ever be her fault and da 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 da. Like I'll tell you what would have been really interesting and a little bit more along the lines of like The Divorcee, which we all really liked last year. If the movie acknowledged like she did sleep with the friend, which is kind of the catalyzing event for the falling apart of her marriage. But the way the movie does it is like they kiss, but then it appears that she denies him, and so she maintains her virtue or whatnot. Like, why not go all the way? Because her husband, she's so unsatisfied with, and he's like unreceptive to her and just listening to the sister. Why not have her have that dalliance and like really explore the dynamics of that? But instead, they want to set her up as this like saintly figure almost.
Yeah, I do think The Divorcee did a lot of it better and was more interesting, but I think it's just a completely different take on more like, what if someone who was faultless essentially couldn't convince someone of their own innocence and their life
Right.
was ruined by it, right? So just tragedy, just this tragic story. And I did find out, though, that this was based on a novel, in 1861 novel by Ellen Wood. And there were a ton of adaptations of this.
Yeah, there's a
it was
silent film,
very
right?
popular. Yeah, there's several. So
Yeah.
I'm going to read you the years in which adaptations of this came out. So we had silent movies in 1913, 1916, 1922,
Jeez.
1925, and then we had
This is
one
like
come out in
Spider-Man.
1930. Then we watched the one in 1931, and then a final one in 1952. So is this just one of the most remade, most adapted? I don't know if I've ever seen that sort of turnaround,
Yeah,
you know?
That's a lot.
Don't let Disney find out about it. They'll be
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah, we can do that. But yeah, it was sort of a running joke at the time. Where,
was it?
yeah, apparently theaters and newspapers would be like, and next up, East Lynne. Yeah, because it was just always playing. Yeah.
I wonder if kind of like the going back to the whole she's faultless, she's blameless, but all these bad things are happening to
Yeah.
her anyway. I would be curious
Yeah.
to look at like the years that those adaptations had come out.
Right.
Particularly like in the 50s to see if there is any trend. Like I can see why it was nominated for an Oscar during the year of like you're a year and a half, 2 years into the Great Depression.
Yeah,
And there are
yeah.
lots of rich people who have suddenly fallen on hard times through no fault of their own.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
I would be curious in like 52, like there's some stuff going on in 52.
Right.
If there's any kind of like similar social context of like maybe potentially why someone was like, you know what, I feel like it's time for another East Lynne movie. I will say, I think the thing that would have improved this movie for me is if they had done more dramatization of some of the stuff that happens in monologue. So like there's a scene where she is talking to her dad. Her father's come to visit her in I think it's Paris at that point, and she's trying to convince him to talk to her ex-husband about letting her come see her son. And there's a whole monologue where she is talking about where she had this dream where she was running down a street and like she's seeing her son's face like come like surface before her, and it's like a nightmare because she's afraid that she's never going to see him again. And that's kind of echoed in like the last scene where she's like going blind, but she manages to see her son's face like is the last thing. That's like the last thing that she sees, and it's kind of a parallel between that. I feel like if they had actually like shown us that dream instead of having her tell us about it, you would have gotten a very cool like visual parallel, but instead it's just like we're being told these things. It's that weird thing of like people not quite having that they don't have the visual language yet to do that because like montage and stuff like that's all happening overseas. So I would love to see the version of this movie that came out like 5 years later when like editing was more of a thing, because I think they would that's a different movie, right?
If it was a play first, that's probably why.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and like I can see where, so this is based on a book, because they probably took like the narrative text of the book and they're like, how do we put this on screen? We'll just basically have her say it.
Even though a lot of what we saw was like her monologuing about her, desire to see her son and everything, we did see a little bit of their relationship prior to when she gets cast out. And it's like this very sweet mother-son relationship. Like she was actually playing with him in a way that stood out to me while watching it, because I think when we, especially when we watch movies of that kind of high class sort of society at the time, just very wealthy people, it's shown as like, oh, well, they had people take care of their kids. They didn't really connect with their kids in the same way necessarily as everyone else. At least that's what's portrayed really often. But like just distanced. But she was there, just like fully on the ground outside playing like she was a monster with him under the blanket. And it was just
cute.
Really cute and endearing. And I don't think we see a lot of that in film, but especially we don't see a lot of that for that level of society. So that was cute. But I guess if we want to move on to our next.
Hey, next up, not East Lynne.
Okay, so next we have Trader Horn, which depicts the adventures of Alfred Horn, aka Trader Horn. He's played by silent film Western superstar Harry Carey, and it basically features his adventures through the African veldt. It's based on the escapades of a real guy, but the story in the movie is pure fiction. While Horn is on safari with his best friend's large adult son, nicknamed Peru, the two discover the daughter of white missionaries who is lost as a baby and subsequently has grown up to become the queen of a dangerous tribe. They, air quotes, rescue her and make an effort to return to civilization, pursued by the tribe and all the dangers of the veldt. However racist you might think it is from that description, rest assured that it is somehow even more racist than that.
Seriously.
You said it. That was like what entered my mind pretty quickly, both in reading a brief description of this movie beforehand, but also within several minutes of it starting. I'm like, this is going to be the most racist thing we've watched so far. And it definitely did not disappoint in that respect.
I think there is something interesting in that, like, I guess it was really popular at the time to go do like travelogues and sort of pseudo documentaries into all these like cool places. Like this was at least partially filmed on location in Africa, although a lot of it was also reshot in California or Mexico, where they could abuse animals without violating laws.
Animal abuse here.
Yeah, but so as a result, you do see like some of the locals of the area. I think it is very cool that you see some of the Maasai like actual cultural wear. It just really sucks that this is the lens through what you're seeing it, like how you're seeing it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And unfortunately, I feel like we see a lot of this for the next several decades of like native culture exploitation films. And it's usually in like Southeast Asia or Africa. And there's a lot of stock footage, which can be really cool. But a lot of times those scenes might be fabricated of what the native people are doing. So there's like some truth to it and some things that are just for the movies.
Intercut with skeletons on fires and like tying people to posts.
Exactly. Which, you know, I unfortunately, I think that shaped the perception of those places for generations to come, right? So they see some of the real and very beautiful things about culture and location. But then you have it intercut with, as you said, like skeletons and the white actors being like, and they're cannibals, you know? So it's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it sucks.
Well, those documentary-esque aspects were my favorite. And like, I would have just kind of been happy watching Trader Joe walk around his little boy guy and just pointing at different animals and making up facts about the animals.
Weirdest David Attenborough movie.
I remember we were...
Yeah, that's like the first hour of the movie.
Yeah, we were watching it and Sarah started like fact-checking what Trader Joe was saying about the animals, and they were like half half like, you know, bush knowledge that he just made up.
Amazing.
And for that reason, it was kind of like, this is the frustrating thing about him, is like, he was kind of endearing to me in a way, because he reminded me a lot of my dad, because my dad would take me and my sister out walking around in the Pine Barrens and like giving us cool nature facts and stuff. But it made me realize like, he was probably making all that shit up, because Trader Joe's just talking out of his ass, and we were checking Wikipedia with everything he was saying, and it was like I say, half wrong, half right. And then just when you think Trader Joe's cool, he'll say something like, "Hey monkeys, go bring me this whatever to his group of guys." And you're like, God damn it, Trader, like, don't do that. So it was frustrating in that way for me. If he could have just stuck to the tour guiding aspect of it and not the racism, that would have been cool.
Yeah, just the animal abuse part of the movie.
Yeah, it was awful.
This movie did make me watch them kill a lion. I feel really resentful
but
about
that rhino, they just shot execution style, point blank.
Well, one of those rhinos got revenge
sickly
because it killed one of the like crew members.
Yeah, which I think that's like a whole other thing that this movie was just plagued.
Yeah, we have to touch
all
on
sorts of things happening to the crew. I don't even know where to start. Like, obviously, as Abby mentioned, one of the crew members, and unfortunately, I think both the two casualties, I think both of them while filming were both African crew members, which is a shame, because it's just like, I don't know, at least have someone involved in the making of this movie.
And neither of them get thanked in like the opening title card. That's like, special thanks to the white hunters that led us through this, the Velton jungle. I was like, as soon as that title card popped up, I was like, this is going to be a bad time.
Yeah, totally agree. But yeah, the two casualties, as Abby mentioned, one, there was a charging rhino, and two, there was a scene where they're hanging off, rope or ivy or like a tree. I don't know, doing the typical Tarzan sort of thing where they swing across a river of crocodiles. And one of the African crew members fell in and got eaten. And the scene in the movie, we do see someone fall in, and it looked pretty real. So I don't know if we also just witnessed, at least partially, someone's last moments on film. So this is a very like deeply uncomfortable watch.
This is like a snuff film almost. At the Oscars.
Yeah,
we've come a long way.
I think after the end of this movie, like because I was doing a little research about the people who died making it.
Yeah.
The fact that the main actress, she got malaria and was sick for like 6 years.
Yeah.
And like her career was ruined. I was just like,
man,
it's so frustrating, because it's like you did all that for this. Like, people died for this shitty piece of shit movie.
Yeah.
Imagine your career being ruined for that as that actress, because that role she doesn't have a line. She's just doing baby talk the whole time. And what I really want to know is, because this is like the most racist thing about it. So she's lost as a baby by her parents, and her father's killed, and her mother makes an appearance early in the movie, and her mother is actually kind of, to me, the most interesting character, but she doesn't make it very long. But anyway, we're supposed to believe that she was, as a baby, integrated into this tribe. And then I guess as a result of her natural
Yeah.
racial gifts becomes like their goddess queen.
Yeah.
And
It's bullshit.
as soon as she leaves the tribe because she's swept off her feet by Trader Joe's boyfriend, she's like a damsel in distress overnight. And
She
like they're
was
like
so
trekking through the
useless.
jungle and they're like, oh, it's a lion. She's like, ah! It's like, presumably you would have killed like several lions
Yeah.
over the course of your lifetime as queen of this major power in this part. I don't know.
They literally were carrying her through much of the movie, and it's just like, this is where she grew up. This, I don't, this would have potentially been her playground. I think it would have been a much more interesting movie if she were the more capable one, and that would have made more sense narratively anyway. But instead, yeah, she just becomes a complete damsel in distress, which is a far cry from the queen of this very warlike tribe in deep Africa. So
this is maybe
Yeah,
the
I
first
don't know.
instance that we've watched of a trope that I think that we will inevitably see more of, which is sexy baby. like she's just there to be like basically like child brained,
Right.
but also incredibly
You're
hot.
right, yeah. And very scantily clad, which also might have been a factor in her getting malaria as well. So,
God.
yeah, it's fine.
Also, we got to pour one out for Ranchero, who was Trader Joe's noble savage manservant who sacrifices himself.
So the actor, well, I guess not even really an actor at that point, but Multia Omulu, I hope I'm probably butchering that, but he was actually a chief of the Maasai tribe
cool.
there in Kenya, which is very cool. I couldn't find a lot of information
Yeah, there's not much
about
about
him, or even just like the way that the movie was received, or something I was really curious about, which was like, what were negotiations and talks like, with this tribe in terms of how they were going to be portrayed in the movie, or what were the expectations of the way that they were going to act in the film together. So, yeah, I don't know. I will say, at the very least, and this is like the lowest of low bars, but it was a little unexpected that after Ranchero sacrifices himself, right, for the safety of our main character, that the last closing sequence, you see him in the sky watching over Trader Horn. And it was, I don't know, usually you get that type of character who sacrifices themselves for the main character, especially if it's like Jake said, a noble savage sort of thing. And then they're just totally forgotten, like never mentioned again. So it was at least an interesting choice to have him watching over things at the end, like an acknowledgement of
Trader
his importance,
Joe
I
is
guess, to
racist
some extent.
as hell, but he loves Africa. He made a point of saying that over and over again.
Oh, yeah. Or loves his idea of Africa.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'd say the vibe, even with Ranchero, is very like, and that was my favorite hunting dog. Like, that it's like,
True.
yeah, like that. I don't know. That's the feeling I got, was like, wow, it's a real shame I must now find a replacement for my for who I send after the wildlife.
Yeah, true. Like I said, lowest of low bars, so way less endearing. And there was one other thought that I wanted to touch on. Oh, on that same level, this film, like a lot of those travelogues at the time, or cultural exploitative films, there's tons of nudity, which I think also speaks to the way that censors at the time just viewed nudity of like native people as very different than nudity of, white women or people in like American or European society. So there's just like this weird layer of like dehumanizing them in some ways.
Yeah,
So I've just, this movie,
Skip it.
yeah, skip it.
We can lose this one.
But at the same time, then it's like, oh, then people died for a last film. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't think there's any way.
Or if you're a movie completionist, watch it for the Oscars. Like we have to see everything.
I'm giving people permission to skip this one.
Yeah.
All right, do we want to move on to our final nominee?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So, based on a popular newspaper strip of the same name, Skippy is about the mischievous son of a local doctor and Department of Public Health official, Dr. Herbert Skinner. Despite being forbidden by his parents, Skippy spends a lot of time in the nearby shanty town. He acquires like a new best friend forever, Sookie. They get up to childish escapades. Kind of features like a bevy of child actors and dogs running around dirt lots. A string of adults who kind of are all in the way of scrappy hijinks, and also, oh right, the looming specter of death.
Exactly. I found out the creator of the comic strip, Percy Crosby, who was ultimately an inspiration for Peanuts for Charlie Brown, he apparently really disliked the film.
Oh, really?
There was already a sequel movie, Sookie, about the, secondary child in this movie that was already like greenlit, so he couldn't go against contract for it, but he didn't let any other Skippy movies be made after that because he was just like, no, I hate it.
That's interesting.
So I liked Skippy. I thought Skippy was funny. Mostly the funny thing about Skip is like, so imagine like an old guy from like the 70s, but in the body of like a 7-year-old boy in the 1930s, and that's Skippy. And it was just funny because Skippy, like his introduction, he gets out of bed, he's like, oh, it's almost like, oh, off to the factory again, and he's like in the
labor
kitchen brushing his teeth, like, oh,
Yeah, it was a really cute opening sequence of him just being like done with life at 9 years old.
Meanwhile, his parents are like these hoity-toity people about town. They're like, Skippy, come down and get your boiled egg. And he's like, I gotta get down to Shantytown, see my friends.
Yeah.
It was very funny to me. And Skippy has a good heart because his dad just wants him to be like a little rich kid who combs his hair. And Skip just wants to roll around in the mud and fight kids over pieces of wood. And then he very much consistently goes to great lengths to help his less fortunate friends. He doesn't tell his father what he's doing, but his father kind of figures it out, and he like ends up respecting Skippy and saving the shanty town that Skippy frequents. So I'm kind of all over the place in that description, but you got to watch the movie because it's an interesting way of, doing the upstairs, downstairs, rich versus poor, and kind of meeting in the middle type thing. And I would imagine very timely for what was going on this period as shanty towns were really cropping up.
This felt like very much one of the first family movies that we've watched, like family oriented, good for all ages sort of thing. I don't know how common it was before, but the ending of this is also very much like neatly tied up in a bow. Everyone was taught some sort of moral lesson and is a better person by the end. So it leaves you feeling good.
Except for that one dog.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, except for the one dead dog.
For that, which
another Christ-like figure.
Penny did nothing wrong. But another theme this year, I guess, is just animal cruelty. No abuse in this one, but obviously just
that we know of.
Abuse of the director
child. Also abused children.
Yeah. So Jackie Cooper as Skippy, he did a great job. He was adorable, like a picture perfect child actor. And he was nominated, for Best Actor for this movie. And he's the youngest still today, because again, he was 9. And kind of cute anecdote, he fell asleep at the Oscars ceremony while all that was going on. So on the surface, very wholesome, but beneath the surface, super tragic. He went on to talk at length about how much he regrets. Well, obviously, he didn't have any control over it, but how much he hates that he lost his childhood to being a child actor. So almost everyone in his family was involved in film in some way, and he wrote a memoir, which is titled, Please Don't Shoot My Dog. Oh. And it's based on his experience here, which shaped a lot of his outlook of the industry. So the director of this movie was his uncle, and Jackie Cooper was finding it difficult to cry for a scene, I think where they find out that the dog's been killed already before they can save it. And as a way to motivate him to cry, the director told Jackie that he was going to kill his dog. And he, with the help of Jackie's grandma, I know. So he, with the help of Jackie's grandma, took the dog into like an alleyway and had a security guard pretend to shoot him. So Jackie cried for the scene, and even after they showed him, after they finished filming the scene, they were like, no, you see, your dog is fine. He's okay. Everything's fine. Jackie Cooper was hysterical, like inconsolable. They had a doctor come in to sedate him.
Oh,
and
that's too much.
It was terrible.
That's not
terrible.
funny anymore.
Yeah, no. Because as an adult, you're like, oh, it's just going to be this little deception and then everything's going to be okay. Like, there is a line I feel like you don't cross, but you don't really think about how traumatizing it would be for a child, right? Who has very like limited life experience. And you are like his support and safety system. So after that, he obviously had like trust issues in the industry and lost a lot of, a lot of the childhood innocence very early on. And as he became more and more known as a child actor, that just continued to what we unfortunately see a lot of still, I feel like, today in Hollywood for child actors. But yeah, he ended up becoming a director for TV. And in an interview, he talked about how he's bad at directing children because he doesn't want to ruin their childhood. So it's just like, dang, his whole life, unfortunately, just was obviously really shaped by these experiences. And there's a quote from his memoir, him looking back at his loss of kind of a normal childhood. He said, quote, "No amount of rationalization, no excuses can make up for what a kid loses, what I lost, when a normal childhood is abandoned for an early movie career. Everybody knows horror stories about stage mothers. I'm talking about the non-horror story that, in a sense, is even more horrible. I'm talking about the child who rose up empty and doesn't realize it until it's too late." End quote. Ugh. So that's like, oh. So now looking at Skippy, and probably anytime we see child actors, I'm just going to have that little bit of sadness because of how they were potentially treated or just what they might have missed out on or whatever else. So which now I'm sad. So sorry to ruin our most pleasant, hopeful, wholesome movie and be like, actually, it was a terrible time. Yeah,
but I think you'll find, Sarah, that if you abuse children on set, you will win an Oscar for Best Director.
True. Yeah, the director
maybe
did win.
It's all worth it.
All I will say, as coming from the acting perspective, is number one, I don't know that Skippy called for method acting to that length. But I do remember when I was like 17, we did a scene at a state competition where I was supposed to be an abusive husband towards my wife.
Oh.
And I got a direction to like psychologically terrorize her outside of the scene and like just randomly like throw chairs across the room as we were running lines and stuff. And we did do well. We placed highly. We didn't win, but the people that did win apologized to us because they said we should have won. So all that to say, that is a little young, however old Skippy was, probably like 7 or 8 to traumatize him like that.
Yeah, he's 9. Yeah.
But if you want to be serious about acting, the best actors are very damaged, insecure people. So that's all I'll say.
Jake coming out to be like, yes, abuse more actors on set.
Stanley Kubrick and Shelley Duvall in The Shining, it's not good in a vacuum, but if people are willing to set aside their own well-being for a creative project, sometimes cool things can result. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I think like adults can make that decision.
Yeah,
I think that children definitely can't. So
yeah, you're right. But he got Oscar nominated, so
that's true.
Yeah, they clearly worth it. He also is, he plays Jim Hawkins in one of the more successful Treasure Island adaptations, and I wonder if his storied career with probably less than scrupulous adults telling him what to do and directing him to do things maybe played into his performance for Jim Hawkins.
Yeah, I could see that. That also reminded me, this is more for, I guess, Jake, who really liked the Cisco Kid. So Jackie Cooper did not play the Cisco Kid, but Peru from Trader Horn went on to play the Cisco Kid in several iterations, including a TV show in the 50s.
That makes sense.
I just thought that was
makes
cute.
sense, because Trader Joe is like, I think he said he was French.
Trader Horn.
I was like,
have we been saying Joe the whole time?
Whatever. I just, that's what he is in my mind. But I thought he was kind of racially ambiguous.
It's like, I hope this man is a white Peruvian, because the actor playing him definitely is.
Yeah, no, he was Romanian.
Yeah.
I feel like the reason he got so mad at them was I don't know. Maybe this isn't good to say at the podcast, but I very much the vibe I got was he was grooming him to be like his jungle, boy toy, and then the queen, the white queen of the Africans, kind of ruined it. So I don't know. It was an interesting dynamic to the movie that I'm not sure was intentional or not, but I like to think that was what was going on, the subtext.
You're just creating your own subplots for movies that we're watching to make them more interesting.
Yeah. That movie was problematic enough without grooming,
seriously.
Oh, God.
But if it really wanted to check every box, then
there's a list.
Zoomers will not like this movie. And as you've said, animal rights lovers, Aunt Kristen, if you're listening, don't watch the movies this year. You will be upset.
So the character in the movie, I think he was supposed to be from Peru. He speaks Spanish in the film, which was kind of cute. But yeah, he was a Romanian actor.
Yeah, I mean, there are white Peruvians.
Yeah,
so,
100%. Yeah.
But
though I still think it was, and this is something that while watching it in different contexts, like if he were in America, he potentially would not have been treated as white at the time.
Yeah.
But in Africa, it was very much like us white people have to stick together sort of thing. And it's just like interesting.
Trader whoever kept saying that over and over again. He's like, you're the first white man to see this waterfall.
Yeah, and he's like, gracias, señor.
The boy toy's like, okay.
Yeah.
Again, somehow even more racist than you think it will be. So.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that frustrates me most about all of these movies is I know that there are better things out there. Like, Skippy is inoffensive in the fact, like, if you want to go watch a, like, aw shucks, hijinks kids comedy that also has a dead dog in it, like, cool, great, it's fine. There's a couple lines that are really funny and kind of, like, catch you off guard. I laughed once while watching it.
High praise.
Like, that's... Well, yeah, high praise. I can't say that I usually, like, laugh a whole lot while watching child comedies. But then you think this is nominated for an Oscar, and it's just, I feel like it's one of those things, it's a highlight of how the Oscars from time immemorial, literally from the first year that it started as a union busting effort, have kind of been like, we're nominating stuff that is not necessarily like the best in its field. It is just maybe either it is popular, like politically within the studio politics, or, it's inoffensive or whatever.
Because of that, watching these movies and just being increasingly disappointed, I guess with the exception of Skippy, which was pretty cute, I was like, was this just a really bad year for movies? Like, maybe the Depression really did impact studios and the production of films, but I looked up what else came out that year, and I feel like we've been cheated.
We got shortchanged. There were better movies that we could have watched.
Yeah, there were so many better movies. So the other ones that caught my eye, just even looking at a short list, Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, which was also the highest grossing film that year. So it's not even just from like a monetary success standpoint, but it was a silent movie, and the Academy was very much pushing towards like, no, we're done with silent movies. Sound is what we're putting all of our resources and attention into. And so I think City Lights very much got snubbed. It's still widely regarded as one of his greatest works and one of the best films of all time, like Charlie Chaplin's masterpiece. You'll often see it at the top of best movies lists of various organizations, and it had far-reaching influence on filmmakers. It's studied in film school for the storytelling techniques and the emotional impact of that kind of comedy drama mix at the time. So we don't get to watch that, unfortunately. Thanks, Academy.
We can't watch it ever.
Yeah, we can't watch it ever because we can only watch things that were nominated from here on out. So sad.
What a curse.
Yeah, what a curse. Also, the movie M, which was a German film, which I'd seen a couple of very well-known sequences from that movie.
Yeah.
But now looking more into it and knowing more about where the film industry was at the time, it was a revolutionary movie, considered one of the first like serial killer thriller sort of movies. It's a precursor to film noir, so it really influenced a ton of movies that came afterwards with its use of shadows and high contrast, and just even the storytelling. You're following both what's going on with the criminal and also the people investigating him, and it delves into the psychology of the villain, who he's a child killer, like he's murdering children, a serial killer who's targeting kids. But looking at the psychology of that antagonist, which was unprecedented for its time, and I still think it's something that we see a lot today, where it's a disturbing portrait, right, of a complex person who can't control their urges, but like, should we kill them? You know, like, how do we deal with this sort of thing in society, this sort of anomaly? So it has some elements to it, like mob mentality of obviously the town and their anger towards this individual, justified anger. And it just seems like a really rich film in terms of the different themes and stuff that it tackles. And it is also, to my knowledge, the first movie that introduced sound as like a leitmotif. The murderer in it whistles the same song every time before he takes a victim. And so when you hear it, you know something terrible is going to happen. And so that was groundbreaking at the time for film.
Sure.
And so, yeah, yet another movie that we'll never get to watch because we had to watch Trader Horn instead.
They should have done an Skippy crossover movie. That would have been perfect.
Maybe
again, the looming specter of death.
Yeah. I think Percy Crosby, after watching Skippy and not liking it, would have been like, you know what? Yeah, let's do the third movie where the antagonist of M comes through the town and...
In Skippy 1, the dogs were under threat. In Skippy 2, it comes to the children.
Hollywood, if you're listening.
It's time for a crossover. Everyone's sick of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We're ready for the Skippy M universe.
Speaking of cinematic universes, one of the other movies that came out this year was Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So you have the beginning of monster movies.
Didn't Dracula come out this year too, or was that a year later?
Yeah, Dracula I think came out a year later. Definitely within the same sort of time period, because you had Frankenstein, Dracula, and then you had like daughter of Dracula, son of Frankenstein, like all these spin-off movies that define the era. And honestly, the way that we think of those characters, because even though they're based on, you know, novels of the same name, the characters are much different than the portrayals that we see on screen. And the ones that we see from these movies are the ones that I think have really cemented themselves in public consciousness. You know, when you see like the Frankenstein cart, the green guy and everything. So these are all things that were significant and important and shaped much of our cinematic future from this point on, and just nothing, you know, no awards or anything, or nominations.
I think it's interesting that like all those movies that did not get nominated, I guess I don't know anything about City Lights, but like M and Frankenstein and kind of like the burgeoning horror genre too, were, on the one hand, I'm sure like there's a weird thing where in hard economic times, like actually like horror and that kind of stuff, like you do get a lot of like, it is actually like very popular in terms of escapism because it's kind of like cathartic, but also the things that are making the most money or are the most like rewarded socially in terms of like, you know, awards and accolades and that kind of thing are those things that are like either like comedies. So like City Lights, highest grossing film that year. I'm sure it's a Chaplin movie, so my bet is
a silent movie.
I know, but it's like highest grossing, so like it made a ton of money even if it didn't get like award accolades. Like, so again, like that catharsis and release. And then meanwhile, everything in the Oscars is like, I don't know, it feels reflective of like the other side of like culture, right? Where it's like everyone's kind of like anxious about their wealth or their fortune, or, you know, it's also too that like reactive othering of people, like in economic downturns of you start to go me versus them, so that we see there's a whole lot of racism this year. Knowing what I do about the movie that we're going to watch today, that it's a Western, is I'm going to bet that we're also going to see some of that in that movie. So I don't know. I just think it's interesting in terms of like what has actually shaped popular culture and versus what was being like talked about or like rewarded at the time, and them being two totally different things.
I think that's a great note to kind of lead us into the main reason we're all here today to talk with you guys, which is the winner of the Oscar this year, Cimarron or I keep saying cinnamon.
I
What
think
is it,
they
Sarah?
pronounce it
think
Cimarron. And I think
Okay.
technically, it's like Cimarron,
Ooh,
but yeah.
Cimarron. Well, in any case, I think we're gonna get ready to watch that movie today, and we'll be back here with you guys in a short while to talk about our initial reactions and whether Cinnamon can salvage
Yeah, close enough.
the movies this year, which was probably the weakest year so far, but I still had fun. Well, welcome back, guys. If you're following along, you would likely have just watched Cimarron. Cimarron. I'm sorry, guys. I'm about to give you a whole description of this movie, and I still can't say the title. But in any case, I just want to preface by saying I have very strong feelings about this movie, and I'm going to try to suppress them
You
in
got
the
this.
interest of giving, a pretty straightforward, hopeful description of what we just watched unfold. But this movie opens in the 1880s, which did historically see a wave of new settlement in the west and middle of the country. And the movie opens with a very dramatic, almost like Mad Max-esque sequence of government officials opening these new giant tracts of land open to white settlers from the east, and all of these individuals and families on buggies and in wagons and on horses rushing out and sort
Don't
of
forget the
racing each
bicycle.
other.
Yeah, the bicycle.
Bicycle, one guy in one of those, the old timey giant front wheel, tiny back wheel bikes. We do get to see one of those. But anyway, it's a pretty exciting sequence that Sarah pointed out included, I think, like thousands of
I think
extras.
like
So
5,000. Yeah.
yeah. But in any case, we're introduced to our main guy here, Yancey. What's his last name?
A cravat.
Yeah, cravat.
Yancey Cravat. He is a prospecting kind of frontiersman. So he's out there kind of joining in the hustle to grab land. And it's just a very kind of invigorating sequence, although I'm sure, that land previously was owned by natives or unspoiled. It's now being cracked open to American settlement. But in any case, he has a short exchange with a young woman who's also out there trying to make her own way. And he returned shortly after this episode in the beginning to his family. He's married into a well-to-do local family as a young wife. They have a very young son, and they're talking about how he wants to move his new young family. Sorry, I don't think I mentioned up to this point, but the new settled region is the Osage region of Oklahoma, which if anyone saw Killers of the Flower Moon this year may ring some bells, and that'll come up later. But in any case, his wife's family is very kind of wary of this new venture, and their logic is they're already pretty well established in Wichita. Why would you want to uproot and go there? But Yancey gives the first of what will be many stirring speeches in this movie about how he has a kind of God-given natural right to spread, in his mind, to expand our sphere of civilization into new uncharted territories. His wife is right along there with him, and they also end up bringing what I can only describe as the Jar Jar Binks of 1930s movies, one of the most disturbing minstrel characters I've ever seen. They have a house servant, a young black boy whose name was Isaiah, but he's very much portrayed as a kind of bumbling portrayal of a character that I'm sure elicited a lot of, laughs at the time, but now in hindsight was kind of disturbing to see. But anyway, Yancey brings his family and Isaiah to this new Wild West, essentially. And basically, as this town is starting up, it's just like a dirt road with some shacks along it and hundreds of white settlers and some marginal Native Americans, Osage, that still live in the area. And it's kind of cutthroat environment. His mission in coming to the town is to start its first newspaper, and his goal in their first edition is to reveal who in the new town committed a recent murder. And it's pretty clear to everybody that it was the head of this kind of small-time gang. And so that guy and his gang starts sort of intimidating Yancey's family. And anyway, it all kinds of culminates in the big first town meeting in a big tent setting where they're raising money to build a church. And so in the course of Yancey giving the big inaugural sermon, you'll find out watching this movie, this guy has probably the worst case of main character syndrome I've ever seen. But anyway, Yancey makes himself a town leader. He gives himself the responsibility of giving this inaugural sermon to try to inspire everyone to donate money so that they can build a church and really start building civilization there in earnest. And he gears up to reveal who he has already figured out committed that initial murder in the town. The gang leader pulls out his gun to shoot Yancey, but Yancey's quicker on the draw and shoots the gang leader, which causes a little mayhem in the tent, but everybody quickly is like, that was awesome, Yancey, as they'll often tell him. And I think that's kind of a symbolic act of purging the savagery in that settlement and starting a pace with constructing a new town.
Sure.
And so he does that. He kind of establishes himself, if it wasn't clear already, as the town leader. We jump a little bit in time. Later, the town is raided, I think a year or two later, by another group of bandits. The bandit leader of this group is an old friend of Yancey, and there's a little bit of an emotional turn when he has to defend the town and kill those bandits, including his old friend. In the course of this sequence, poor Isaiah, the minstrel character, is killed, and kind of an inglorious end. But in any case, the town, you can see, is gradually getting more established, more things on the streets, more buildings. Jump ahead another 5 years, it's even more developed. But we're also starting to see Yancey is getting a little stir crazy. He's getting his sense of wanderlust again, as the U.S. government is stealing more land from indigenous people, in this case, Cherokee Indians in another region of the country. By this point, Yancey's wife is pretty established in town. They have a second child, and she's pretty comfortable and happy where she is, so she's not wanting to leave. So he leaves his family very abruptly and disappears for about 5 years, presumably to go on further adventures of colonization and whatnot. In that time, Yancey's wife becomes really the manager of their family newspaper and runs it quite competently. She really kind of flourishes, except she kind of maintains a strain of bigotry in the early part of the movie, particularly toward indigenous Americans, but also toward the female character that Yancey knew from the beginning during that exciting pioneering chase, who turns out to be a prostitute with a checkered past in the town. And one of the wife's main missions is to put this prostitute in jail. So it just so happens that the prostitute character is about to go on trial for unseemly behavior when our hero Yancey arrives back to town from his adventures and comes into the family, has a very emotional reunion with everybody, but very quickly finds out that his wife is now crusading to put this other woman behind bars for being a prostitute, essentially. So Yancey, in a move that I felt was very disrespectful to his wife, decides to advocate and be the lawyer for this prostitute in the trial setting, and in the course of that gives this woman the opportunity to talk about her life and how she's ended up in the circumstances she has, which allows him to turn the opinion of the jury and get her off the hook. Yancey's wife is initially very embarrassed and frustrated with him that he did that, especially after being gone for 5 years, but he gives another one of his hyper charismatic speeches to her and the household, and she's like putty in his arms within minutes after that. So Yancey, again, is living for a time, I think maybe like a decade or so in the town. We jump ahead now again to the late 1890s, where Yancey is running for governor. This is the same time period that the Osage Indians who live on a reservation in Oklahoma discover, again, if people have seen Killers of the Flower Moon, oil under their land. So there is now this big boom at the turn of the century of new oil money, formerly in the control of these natives on a reservation, but as we quickly see in this movie as well, actually, which I was impressed that they do this, but they show kind of white vulture characters coming in and trying to get access to that new wealth. And that's epitomized by a kind of corrupt local official coming to Yancey as he's running for governor, saying, hey, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Let's get you into office. We'll get ownership or management of this new oil money, and it'll be good for everyone. And Yancey, being the principled imperialist that he is, tells him, he does not think that that is the right thing to do, and he doesn't want to cut that sort of deal. He views the Osage as American just as much as anyone else, and they should be in control of their own wealth and money. So he expresses this to his wife. His wife is initially frustrated because she views his attaining the governorship as kind of the culmination of everything they've done there in Osage to build their lives. And of course, he gives another one of his speeches, and shortly after, we're left to believe he did not successfully attain the governorship, and in fact leaves his home again and kind of disappears, this time for several decades. We jump time again to 1929. Really striking thing now is the town where they started out. Now we're 40 years later, and it's basically a bustling city street, as you would see in most major cities of the time in the 1920s. And we jump to Sabra, Yancey's wife, is now in charge fully of the newspaper. She's in kind of a penthouse suite, kind of looking back, reminiscing with the printer over all the work they've done over the years. And it's revealed that she's about to become a state senator for the burgeoning Progressive Party in the state of Oklahoma. So she's being toasted at a dinner by the local notables. Her older son is married to an Osage woman, which I think is supposed to be heartwarming and to show that Sabra's opinion on natives has changed. Although, if people know the history, probably part of the reason he married her was for her oil money. Anyway, setting that aside, it seems to be a nice conclusion for this wife's character as she gets to look over the decades at everything they've achieved and in their minds the progress that they've introduced to this territory. And right as the movie's about to end, they're visiting the oil fields in Osage County on the reservation, and there's a major accident, and Sabra is there, and she comes to the scene of the accident, and it's revealed that something exploded and everyone was endangered by it but one kind of drifter who's working on the oil field for money. He jumped in front of everyone and sacrificed himself to save everyone else. And we find out in his dying breath, this gentleman, who could it be but our favorite colonizer and white savior, Yancey, who...
Unrecognizable because he's being played by a different actor at this point.
The technology.
Yeah, he's very old and weathered, but in his dying breath, he's held by his wife and sort of thanks her, but also asks for her support in his dying moments. They also reveal, it really ends on them revealing a statue to the white pioneers of Oklahoma. Which very fittingly, the statue is a Yancey-looking white man with a hat with a kind of cowering, presumably non-white person being protected and shielded by him.
Is it not literally Yancey? I guess it was just a memorial, huh? But I think it was a Native American behind.
I think us as the viewers,
him.
are supposed to assume it's essentially Yancey, but... Wow, do we have... I mean, I have thoughts about this movie, and I think it was a very appropriate best winner for this year, which was a interesting year in film. Probably, I want to say the most interesting so far, but I've been talking for a while, so I'd love to hear what you guys think about this film.
You kind of mentioned, obviously, this is dealing with some of the Osage region. And just to put into context, like, this was made 5 to 10 years. Like, some court cases, I'm sure, had just been resolved in conjunction with the reign of terror with those Osage murders over oil rights and stuff with all of that land. So it's crazy how relevant all of that was. And I think that the movie taking kind of a pro-Osage lens through Yancey is, I would assume, in part a result of having gone through that, trying to like wash your hands in some ways of, what was going on at that time. So
I think washing hands is a good way to put it. Like, oh, only terrible people would do that. Right. And we're not terrible people.
Right. Yeah. Even Jake, with your summary, when you mentioned like some of the white vulture characters coming through, and as Yancey is having this pro-Osage sentiment coming up with like, no, they deserve citizenship. It's like there's this weird cognitive dissonance that the first part of the movie, which is just treated as like a manifest destiny Wild West situation where everyone is just rushing to claim what they can of the land as like very vulture-like, it's just like, no, that's different though. That's different.
And it's so apropos of our times too, because it's always the cliche is everything that's happening now is bad,
Mhm,
but everything
mhm.
that happened before, we had no control over that. Don't hold us responsible for that. But now we know,
Right.
right? And I kind of feel like Yancey is embodying that in his sort of progressive turn in middle age. But
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
Well, I do think though that we see like he's posed as this character from the beginning in terms of like being supportive of American Indian rights.
Mhm.
Like that's the
yeah.
first thing that his mother-in-law criticizes him for, like all
Yeah, it
that
doesn't
stuff.
come out
So
of nowhere.
it doesn't come out of nowhere, but it is like that weird, I guess, hypocritical fact where it's like when they do the second land rush to claim Cherokee land, is he's like, this is terrible and they're stealing this land. Anyway, better go join the land rush.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that weird, like I said, just cognitive dissonance because it's never fully treated as like I think I would argue that it is like glorified to some extent just out of that like Wild West spirit, but it doesn't ignore that there are people being impacted and certain characters like Sabra, you know, the wife, first viewing these people as subhuman and then eventually being kind of a champion of them. So the film acknowledges, right, that it's like, no, these are people and it's messed up that like these sorts of things happened, but it kind of glosses over a lot of the actual impacts throughout the movie.
Yeah.
It just like very lightly touches on it, which at the time I'm sure was still very significant, but now obviously in retrospect, watching it from 2024, it's like, okay, well, this is very
I also
little.
think though that like the like Saber's turn even is these characters, like the American Indian characters, they don't get respect until they have been civilized.
Yes,
Like
yeah.
they
Right.
do not get
They get
respect
money.
on their own terms. They must be civilized first, and then you can respect them and treat them like people.
Yes.
Like, oh, you got money, you're a human now.
Right.
You got property.
Right.
Welcome to America.
And you see most of the natives, with the exception of Ruby, you know, ultimately the main character's son's wife, right, who is still wearing native clothing, but all of the other natives are wearing suits, right? They're in like
Right.
attire of the time. So yeah, that is, I think, a very good point, and reminds me a little. Well, I don't know how to. But there are two thoughts that I have, I guess, on this. One being that the current vice president at the time, Charles Curtis, he was Native American. I was surprised just in general because I didn't know that at that time there were any kind of like minority in positions of federal power. But he, even though he was Native American, raised in part on the Kaw reservation where his maternal grandparents took care of him, he was pretty instrumental in passing the Curtis Act, which was what resulted in the breakup of tribal governments in that area that had previously
Man,
been
that
able to
sucks.
hold. Yeah, exactly. So he kind of was instrumental in Oklahoma becoming a state. And although he regretted that the bill had changed to where Native Americans didn't really have support during those transitions, he still was fully of the belief, you know, that it's like, yeah, assimilation is how we become citizens.
I have to tell you, I can't help in thinking about this movie, and it was like hitting me pretty early on, but it just deepened as the further we went into it. I can't take it out of the context in terms of the country's history when this movie was released. And by that, I mean, this is a time period in the first several decades of the 20th century when a lot of those traditional assumptions about what it meant to be an American and how to achieve your independence, autonomy, prosperity, and happiness were thrown into question by some of these structural changes to the economy and to just the geography of the country. You know, by this point, those Western frontiers that are so inspirational to Yancey and other characters in the beginning of the movie, by the time this film is released in the early 1930s, most of those frontiers have essentially been cut off. In addition to that, agricultural lifestyle in general is being really endangered during the Great Depression, as you have the Dust Bowl, price fluctuations, and the price of agricultural goods. This notion that you could pick up your family, go out west, establish yourself to this new uncharted country was ending. And there was a conscious effort at this time that you start to see towards the end of this film of modernization, of saying, okay, the new American dream is no longer your own kind of kingdom on the prairie, but to be part of a civilization, to be part of a bustling metropolis, to get a job in these burgeoning industries. And that was really the 1920s, as the middle class was kind of being conceived of as a concept after World War I, as more and more small households were encouraged to purchase stock on the stock market, which they did wholeheartedly and excitedly, only to have that blow up in everyone's face at the end of the decade. People were really shell-shocked and they were going through a difficult time. And I think a movie like this, more than anything, was a real nostalgia trip.
Yeah.
It's almost like in the depths of the Great Depression saying, man, I wish I was my grandparents' generation when you could just be a cowboy.
Right.
And yeah, it was dangerous, but you had control over your own life. And a movie like this stimulates that nostalgia. The most disturbing thing for me about the movie, and it's made pretty clear early on, and not to get off what I was saying, but really nails down that racial hierarchy. And it goes just like this. Brave, chart-coursing white man who takes along his immediate dependents, primarily his wife and his children, but also maybe some non-white zany sidekicks like Isaiah, or if we're talking about Trader Joe, Ranchero.
Trader Horn.
And then... whatever, it's too far gone. I just realized I was calling Sabra the hummus. Yeah, I thought I was thinking the hummus the whole time. Anyway, but like I was saying with the racial hierarchy thing, the gang that he defeats early on establishes his control in the town, very much is giving Latino. That's the vibe that you get. They're very kind of swarthy.
Yeah, that's
And
how
then
they're styled and costumed and like made up.
Yeah, you have Isaiah, the minstrel character, and then you even have the Jewish kind of shopkeeper who like is subservient to the main white character, but very much is in his lane of being kind of a money counting weakling, which was a racist stereotype at that time, and obviously in the 30s that had implications.
Which I would be curious to know if that is an adjustment from the novel, because the novel is written by Edna Ferber, who is an American Jewish woman.
Right.
Yeah, but she might have been habituated to...
No, I think she very specifically, because I know a bit about Edna Ferber, because she faced discrimination both in America and she used to visit Europe a couple times every year. So she kind of saw more and more that there was like more hostility growing. It made her much more aware of like racial stereotypes in general. So in many of her works, she tried to include at least a character, whether they were a main character or a secondary character, who experienced some sort of like ethnic discrimination. So I would think that that characterization was a movie addition, but you know, you'd be surprised ultimately how many of those stereotypes just leach into your subconscious. So not sure. I have not read the book. So.
Yeah, I also did read that the novel that it's based on is kind of a, like on the one hand, it is one of the few portrayals of Osage Indians in like the canon of like American literature. So on the one hand, it's kind of valued, but on the other hand, it's like there's a lot of stereotyping and anti-Black sentiment in the novel itself.
Yeah.
I would be interested to know like what the role of the Jewish character in the novel is.
Yeah, same. Because definitely in the movie, a lot of uncomfortable racial stereotypes and a lot of even the kind of sentiments of redeeming qualities or whatever. It's always just like this uncomfortable posing. There's like subservience, and it's almost like they're viewed as one of the good ones, you know, like not the norm. And so, I wonder how much of that is movie versus book versus that obviously just seemed to be a common way of thinking at that time.
And very interesting to me that in early 20th century white supremacy, it seems like to be Black was to be the lowest end of the rung.
Right.
Almost like a joke. And interesting to me considering how little, I mean, obviously we've made progress, but I would still say for a lot of racist people, that's still their placement on the rung.
Well, I think you mentioned it during your summary, but The White Man's Burden, which is a poem by noted imperialist Kipling, that's just, this is White Man's Burden, the movie, right? Where it's like, oh, you're sending out, there's this noble guy, he's going to do the best for everyone and no one's going to thank him, but he's going to civilize a place that is like wild and untamed just because it is his duty as a white man.
And as a Christian.
as a Christian white man, and is ultimately going to sacrifice himself on the altar of civilizing this place, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't
So
know. This movie
noble.
sucks.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
It was disturbing, and it was like the fact that there was nuance towards the end of it made it more insidious to me.
Yeah,
Because I
agree.
could see the threads of like liberal apologia.
Right.
Like Trader Horn feels, I mean, obviously it's incredibly racist, and it is like purposeful, but it also feels like ignorant to a certain
Yeah.
level, a
Yeah.
certain degree.
Yeah, it's definitely a
Whereas
dumber movie.
Yeah, it's a way dumber movie. Whereas this feels like, I know this is racist,
Right.
and is actively being acknowledged. And you're right, it makes it feel somehow worse because of that,
Right.
where it's like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, right?
Right.
Yeah. And it's the same character.
Right.
Yeah.
Having Yancey stand up for Native Americans or whatever else and being on quote unquote the right side of history, as a viewer, I feel like it's almost giving permission to be like, see, you can pat yourself on the back if you agree with him, but you don't actually have to look at reality and do anything about it. You just, you can just feel good about yourself.
Yeah.
Or even just think about, we're supposed to feel so good about how established the wife is at the end, and you can, in a sense, from a gendered perspective. But think about the theft, dispossession, abuse, and outright murder that her family's position is
Right.
predicated
Well,
on by
okay,
that act.
right?
So Edna Ferber, in some ways, was ahead of her time, so to speak, because this movie, well, and the source material, but the movie, Sabra's character arc going from like housewife into a congresswoman into whatever, running this newspaper and stuff on her own. This was seen as almost like a feminist story, but in her autobiography, she actually said that it was supposed to be a satirization or a criticism of American womanhood or sentimentality, because
Good.
literally Sabra the entire time is using the tools at her disposal, like her domesticity, to civilize Native Americans, and the power that she grows for herself is really just forcing that idea of American womanhood and expanding her own sphere of influence as a woman at the expense, right, of the Native culture and Native
Yeah, her
people. of
power
them.
is something that she ultimately stole from someone else.
Exactly. So even though, like, as a woman, her power gets stolen by other people, she, to increase her own power, is also stealing it from Native Americans. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, white women, but being one of the little Remora fish that attaches itself to a great white shark does not absolve you of the fact that you're feeding on the same carcasses, okay?
Yeah.
I know that's like a brutal way to frame it, but like...
No, I think it's accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. But, definitely a product of its times. But kind of as we stated, like, just the awareness that it seems to show in acknowledging some of the wrongdoing by people that continued, both continued
Yeah,
in
it's not like it
reality.
stopped.
It's not like it stopped, and it's like looking back. So it continued in reality, and we know that movies of this time period continue to perpetuate these types of ideas and stereotypes. That, to me, makes it more uncomfortable, right? It's not, like
Yeah.
you were saying, ignorance, right? It's like, yeah, we know, but this is kind of what we're used to, so we're just going to do that.
Yeah, particularly we're going to start to get into with the Hays Code and that sort of thing, where you see very little of non-white American life
Right,
on film.
right.
So we're going to start to see even fewer people of color, like even more stereotyped portrayals of American Indians on screen as we get
Right.
more into Westerns and that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I think last episode we talked about those movies largely had been filmed and produced prior to the actual stock market crash and kind of the beginning of the Great Depression. Whether the following year we would see like what we might be able to see in terms of reflected sentiment in the movies.
We're
like,
seeing
the
it
change
now.
in movies. And yeah, if we're seeing it now, I think it's really interesting and sad
Yeah.
that like an economic downturn, suddenly we see a bunch of characters, because we see it with the sex worker character in this movie, where, basically people who through no fault of their own come across hard times and suddenly are either punished for it by circumstance or have to figure out new ways to make their way, and then also see so much othering between like white Americans and other people. And it's just, I don't know, it's a big contrast from the movies that we saw last episode in
Yeah.
terms of like what is valuable about those stories being told versus this year, where it's like, well, it's a bunch of racism
Yeah.
and some child labor like abuses
Yeah.
and a bunch of animal abuse and
Right.
The regression is happening in real time.
It is, but
yeah.
but I am like, this is the first year that I feel like we are consistently featuring side characters that are non-white. The characterization has a lot of problematic elements to it, and that I think can tell us largely what society was trying to say about non-white people. But I feel like all of the movies we watched before just centered fully on like, it's a white world, it's just white people stories in white worlds, and this is the first year where we're seeing like, well, there are non-white people in the world, and some of them are okay, you know. But you see,
that's fair.
When they shine our shoes.
Exactly. You see a lot of the ugliness of what people thought, but there's like an acknowledgement that was not there in previous years. And I do kind of wonder how much the Great Depression has to do with that in general, just in terms of everyone was struggling, and kind of as we mentioned in Skippy, like the shanty towns, my understanding is many of those had people of all races, right? Because anyone who was poor, you know, at that time, which was a lot of people, including, you know, some white populations as well.
But no African Americans in Skippy except for one
child
who is in
he has like one
there
line.
for like 2 scenes.
Exactly.
And also is like, I mean, everyone's a comedy relief character in Skippy, but
yeah, pretty much. This is, I think, the beginnings of a lot of problematic stereotypes that we're seeing in kind of like the mainstream, well-regarded movies. But like, I think it just creates stereotypes for whatever group it is, and those get perpetuated because they're just side characters. Like, they're not viewed fully as people, they're not viewed as the heroes, so they don't get their whole stories told, and maybe just as an element of, let's do what people are familiar with because it makes it easier for us as writers, as producers, whatever.
Like
shorthand. Yeah, so it's just like, this is this type of character, and here's this person over here, and we're just not even going to do anything past that for decades. You know,
you see that too with like the women characters in this movie. I know when the opening credits started, I commented, oh, look, we got all three of the types of women. We get a dedicated wife, a glamorous sex worker, and an overbearing like community member.
Right. Who, to be fair, she was kind of
all
my
three
favorite.
types.
She was funny. And I was just going to say off what you were saying, Sarah, the thing that gets at my stomach about the whole racial hierarchy aspect is the way artistic pieces like this portray it in a noble way, in the sense of, you know, look at this sacrifice that not only Yancey is making, but also what is this fetishization of non-white, particularly black characters sacrificing their own lives for the white characters, and then the white main character feeling like guilty about it? Is it like an absolving? Like, I'm trying to get at the psychology of it, because we saw it in Trader Horn and we saw it here, and it's just like, ugh, I feel like I need a shower after that movie.
Yeah, just skip 31 like anyone who is doing like an all Oscars like noms watch. You can just skip this year, it's fine.
So I will say this movie, obviously the costuming was very good. The scale of it was impressive.
Yancey was serving the whole time. I was
his
like,
outfits, they were
the proportions of the costuming
cool.
is like
A+.
incredible.
A+ to the costume.
In the
department.
courtroom, we were talking about, he looked like Harry Styles. He kept whipping his hair back and forth, and it's like, damn. It almost made me want to be a white imperialist for a second. Just kidding.
No, take it back.
So I guess on that note, even though we've kind of answered this already, which movies do we think are worth watching from this year?
None. Skip. If you're gonna
Who's our
watch
audience?
one, I guess watch Skippy, but honestly none.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I'm taking that back. I think watch none, but if you're gonna watch any of them, watch the front page, because that's doing some interesting stuff camera-wise.
Yeah.
And also is one of the shorter movies of...
None of them felt
Of the
short,
list.
though.
Yeah, that didn't feel that dragged too.
Even Skippy's like an hour and 25,
Yes.
and it feels like 2.
Is this also
I'm just
why,
gonna
like, is
say,
this
I
also
love
Depression
Skippy,
era escapism, where it's like, let's just try and keep them in the theater as long as possible? Like, let's drag this movie out. You don't have to go back to reality yet. Don't worry.
Guys, I don't think we should loop Skippy in with the other ones. I think Skippy's fine. That's all I'm going to say about.
I think
I enjoyed
the front
that.
page and Skippy can be in their own category of like these are okay. Although the front page also is like, I don't know. Sorry,
There's problematic elements.
Everything
definitely.
this year
I think skip all of them.
Yeah, that is definitely fair. I do have to wonder, since many versions of East Lynne don't have the last 10 minutes with that ending, and what a different experience to not have.
Probably a way better movie.
A way better movie, potentially. But trust us, the full version is worth skipping. I think, I also agree. I enjoyed elements of Skippy. I think in any other year that would have been like the weakest movie, but still okay. Right. But it's just speaking about how low the bar is this year. I would think that it's kind of the best one in terms of enjoyability that year, and it's still like, it's okay.
We all only have so many hours on this earth.
Yeah. That's a good point.
You simply don't have to use them up like we've chosen to use ours.
Normally I'm pro completionist, but watch Skippy if you're looking after your niece or nephew and you need something.
Yeah, and you just want to watch
or your children.
Like a
might not be a spinster like me.
Yeah. Well, do we think that the winner deserved the award?
Oh my God, what a question.
In the sense that Cimarron embodied what
Cimarron.
19 all right. I'm just saying I'm giving up this year on the names. I don't know what anybody's name was. We got Sabra Hummus, we got Trader Joe's, whatever. In the sense that this movie really epitomized the vibe of this year. Animal cruelty, bigotry, imperialism, etc. It deserved the award.
The boxes.
Yeah.
God.
I think one of the first notes I took on Cimarron was, okay, this movie has the most spectacle out of all the nominees, because you've got there's a ton of extras, there's so much costuming work, and like all the production side of it seems to be pretty impeccable. But then it's like, do we really decide that the thing that makes it most worthwhile is like the lush quality of the production,
right? Like the money.
Like I don't think that's necessarily true. Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
I if I were in the room and had to choose between these movies, I think I would probably choose Skippy. But I would acknowledge that we are all losers this year. Like, none of us won. Like, this was not a good year for film whatsoever. But hopefully this will be our lowest point.
Oh, baby.
I doubt it.
Well, what I'm hoping is that even in future years where there are worse movies, not all of them will be bad. Yeah, exactly. This was, I feel like, potentially a unique year in which each movie was just not very good, not worth the time.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Good one for you to miss, Chrysantha. I hope you feel better.
Yeah, feel better, Chrysantha.
Yeah, feel better. All of us will also work on feeling better about everything from this point on.
This would have just made you sicker watching this today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, next year, the nominees are Aerosmith, Bad Girl, The Champ, 5-Star Final, Grand Hotel, 1 Hour with You, Shanghai Express, and The Smiling Lieutenant. I don't think I know about any of those. I've seen The Champ, actually, but...
Are we still in pre-Hays Code? I know technically the Hays Code is as of next year.
Yeah, I think 1934 was really when it came into full force. So we're going to see. Obviously, we're seeing next year more nominees, maybe because... I have to assume there was outcry over these movies. Like, how could you not include some of these other ones? We need to expand.
There's more racist movies.
Yeah, exactly. We can include all of them.
I guess small blessings. We didn't have to watch 10 racist movies.
Yeah, silver lining. Silver lining, just 5.
Well, all I know is the Smiling Lieutenant sounds like a euphemism to me. And I'm not sure what for, but I think curious what that's about.
Lieutenant stars the same guy who was in, the movie with the Queen and
I like that guy,
the diplomatic attaché. I can't. I'm blanking on the name.
Maurice Chevalier.
French.
right?
Yeah,
Maurice
yeah,
Chevalier.
yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
French.
like the turn he made at the end of that movie, but he's a very charming man. I'm excited to
Yeah.
see him again. That makes total sense why it's called The Smiling Lieutenant if he stars. 'Cause he's a smiley motherfucker.
Well, hopefully next year is a better year. Stick with us to find out. Like, comment, subscribe, whatever else you can possibly do. Maybe support us on Patreon points so we can keep watching movies and providing you quality content and letting you know what you should spend your time watching and what you should skip, which is literally every movie this year. Come and see us next time.